I am Professor Nalini. I chair the Department of Anatomy at UNSW, which is in Sydney, Australia. And I think we have a fantastic, diverse group of people that are trying to work in this area and make education, anatomy education in particular, inclusive. I also chair the education program of the IFAA and am an assistant editor like Claire on anatomical sciences education. So what I want to do in this next 10 minutes is actually give you an idea of what inclusive, diverse, and accessible anatomy looks like or may look like in the future, because that's what we're trying to think about. So diversity, inclusion, and access are critical topics for consideration in higher education. From an education perspective, these concepts have a direct influence on the learning environment that we seek to create for our learners and its connections with the real world. As a discipline, we have a natural and critical relationship with these concepts. The history of the practice of body donor programs, for example, tells a story of the discipline's quest to promote good practice and influence normative ethics. From a history of grave robbery and discriminatory practices towards our quest to tribute our donors and to delve into higher concepts of consent. Those all illustrate a history of us wanting to be a discipline that is inclusive, diverse, and accessible. So today is really about thinking about how we can push boundaries when we think about these concepts in a different way. So I thought it'd be important to actually talk about what the difference between diversity, inclusion are, and why the theme is inclusive, diverse, and accessible. So put very simply, someone explained this to me when I first started thinking about these concepts a few years ago. And she said, put very simply, diversity is about the what. It focuses on the makeup of who we are, our workforce, our community, and for us as an anatomist, our discipline. Inclusion, on the other hand, is about the hows. It's about the environment, the community, and the culture that we want to create. It is about what enables us to thrive and participate in our discipline. And access for me is probably something that I'm really excited about all the time, because access is about innovation and it is about the opportunity that we have to actually make our discipline available to other people. So by that in the theme, that's what we're trying to get to. What is inclusive, what is diverse, and what is accessible? And so we're asking you to conceive that as broadly as you can in terms of the discipline of anatomy. So our discipline content is directly connected to discussions on diversity and variation. Humans vary biologically in different ways, including individually, due to age, as we all have discovered, due to our genetic makeup, and also due to our gender. An understanding of these complexities of biological variation is really necessary to be efficient in healthcare delivery. Important steps in teaching medical students about human variation could be carried out in our anatomy classes, and therefore it is very important that anatomy education absorbs new developments on biology and biological variation, but also pushes boundaries about how we make our discipline relevant to medical practice, to healthcare, to the development of scientists in our profession. So it matters that anatomy is inclusive, diverse, and accessible. And our classrooms are the opportunities to bring these to life. But more than that, it's an opportunity to engage with social context and social conversations and to improve our cultural engagement. So previous research has shown that there is a gender bias in medical education, with negative attitudes and behaviors perpetuating from our classrooms into healthcare practice. Our discipline, unfortunately, has also perpetuated an androcentric bias towards how we present anatomy. For example, in anatomical textbooks, visual representations of the human body are dominated by young white male representatives. It is only in the last 3 to 5 years that we have begun to slowly witness a change, and I hope that that is going to be a steady change into the future. The one area of concern, though, and surprisingly it is that in the area of novel, innovative anatomy software, we have taken a few steps backwards. Much of the representation in anatomical software, in innovative anatomical software, has a dominance of traditional male stereotypes. This highlights that the importance of inclusive representation has not really made its way into the thinking of our discipline across the spectrum and globally. And so there is a lot of work for us to still do in pushing the boundary on this bias. More than that, though, representations of ethnicity, body type, health, and age are few and far between. Medical education, however, is making inroads into more inclusive health education, and we actually need to be part of that inroad. For example, just a few weeks ago, I presented a lecture on the early onset of menopause, talking about young women who may be at menopause and how their anatomy is changing. Those who listen to my talks at previous conferences know that I have a particular interest in pediatric anatomy. And so as an example, pediatric anatomy is really important, and it's really important that we teach it. It is and has been shown to be a contributor to medical error. And it is surprising that even in this day, we have a large number of pediatric deaths. I've got the stats for the US, but the US by no means is dissimilar to many other countries. So anatomical variations between adults and pediatrics are well known, but how often do we actually teach our students in our anatomy education that these differences exist? Lots of the work that's happening in this is in the area of research, and I'm really glad to have a number of my colleagues contribute to this area of research, but also to see that journal publications have devoted particular issues to highlighting these changes and these important variations. Our challenge, though, is to take this research and put it into our classroom. So for anatomy education, there is a trend to focus on traditionally what is taught, but we actually need to think about how do we take research and the important developments into our classrooms. Perpetuating the stereotypical representation in anatomy fixes our discipline in the past and means that we do not provide our healthcare professionals with adequate and realistic information about the framework of the human body of the patients that they will definitely be treating. The purpose of education is to develop a whole person and to develop that whole person so that they're able to recognize and serve the communities in which they are. As our communities change both in how they look and in their healthcare needs, then we too have to change how we teach anatomy and how we train future professionals. Aging populations, chronic disease, ethnic diversity, indigenous inclusion, they all are important to the discipline of anatomy and how we teach it. The discipline of anatomy deals directly with the human body and therefore plays a pivotal role in these discussions, but also a pivotal role in constructing normative ideas of the body, not just in medicine, but in society in general. So inclusion is important, and it is important that we are inclusive in how we teach anatomy. But turning a little away from just inclusion and our students and how we teach anatomy for a moment into how this looks for us. So remember, I said diversity is about who we are. For those of us who are discipline leaders at our institutions, there is really a need for us to ensure that our faculty are diverse, that our faculty recognize that they are diverse, and that they continue to be inclusive. For every single one of us, though, as anatomists, there's a real role to play in developing the pipeline of anatomists who can think and be ready to deliver the discipline for the future. And I'm saying that because often I think the conversation and the motives are really about embellishing our CV and promotion applications. But I think as a discipline, we need to think beyond that, because we are really the curators of an age-old discipline, but a discipline that matters and a discipline that has to adapt to the future. So some ways in which we can actually think about this is thinking about how we empower others and how we empower others that are younger than us. There are concepts that come through in professional development of developing communities that act as allies, mentors, and sponsors. So I just thought I'll spend a moment talking about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor and why that's really important for us as we think about coaching the next generation in the discipline. So mentors, I think we know a lot about. It's mentorship, and it is really trying to help you develop your career and move to the next level. It's very goal-centered, and it's very one-on-one centered. Sponsors, however, are a different group of people. It's a group of people that every single one of us needs. And it is that group of people that advocate for us to be on different committees, to be in different roles, and to be able to serve our community in different ways. So for every single one of us, especially for those of us who are diverse and are in minority groups, sponsorship is the important way in which we are given a voice at the table. So sponsorship is important. And I would like to challenge our societies and our disciplines to think about mentorship and sponsorship as two different things. I think it's really important that every society thinks about creating a strategy for diversity, inclusion. And some of that is about creating and respecting accountability. So how do we actually make each other as an anatomist in the discipline accountable so that we are inclusive and diverse? Because this is what we actually need to transform culture, but it's also what we need to recognize and empower people with different abilities. One example that I've put up on the slide there is what we call the panel pledge. It's very popular in Australia, and I heard that different variations of it are very popular in other countries. And I do know that our panel pledge was borrowed from the UK. So thank you to our colleagues in the UK. The panel pledge is really a commitment by societies of disciplines, by institutions, by organizations to make a commitment. For example, when they're organizing a conference or a symposium or any kind of speaking event, that the panel that they're putting together is representative and is balanced. And that is one of the ways in which we address the issues of sponsorship, for getting people to have a voice at the table. So I will encourage everyone who has a voice in a society to think about how we can actually develop panel pledges or similar kinds of things to make sure that we are actually addressing the needs of future anatomists. Now, in this area, of course, the IFAA has started to do some important work, and there is another program that deals with it. There is an article that we published earlier, and we're trying to build on that. So you would have seen a survey come through your societies from the IFAA to identify what the needs are of young anatomists, emerging as anatomists, established anatomists, so that we can better ready you for a global challenge of improving anatomy education. After the symposium, you'll get another email with that survey, and we really would like to hear from you to know how best we address your needs. The last part of this is accessible, of this theme of the conference is about accessibility. And accessibility, like I said, it's about recognizing the opportunity and providing access to all. Now, one of the things that really bugs me, and it bugs me for a number of reasons, partly because my identity is of someone who's come from South Africa and moved to Australia. So I still have a close relationship with South Africa. In fact, all my family is in South Africa, so I have more than a close relationship with South Africa. But it is something that concerns me because every single time that I put out an ad for people, for recruiting people into my department, I get a number of applicants from across the world. The last ad we had more than 300 applicants apply for our job. And the thing that makes me sad very often is that The idea of access is really difficult because the skills we are looking for when we teach anatomy is so different from the skills in other countries, and often in other countries where there's less opportunity. So for me, there's a real need for us as a global society, as a global federation, to build capacity in people so that there is a level playing field for skills and there is the opportunity to move into jobs that you want. You don't have to want it, but if you want it, you should have access to that opportunity. And I think accessibility is beyond just ourselves. It's also about our students. So how do we actually cater for non-traditional students? How do we cater for students who have certain needs? And I'm thinking particularly about students who have cognitive and lifelong disabilities that challenge their learning, but also for other students who are not able to be with us in person. So challenges and difficulties faced by students with intellectual disabilities in higher education is already well known. Among the positive points of remote learning, of the pivot during the pandemic last year, was the fact that we actually were able to have a richer and deeper conversation with our students because they were remote, which was really surprising and a really good plus. And I think that closer relationship actually highlighted for us the number of challenges students face in trying to access and learn anatomy. And so I think one of the opportunities for us going into the future is thinking about how we can bridge that really important gap. We also are at an opportune moment in terms of our discipline across the world. I think everything that happened during the pandemic has actually forced us to reimagine how we taught anatomy, but we also at this threshold of reimagining our discipline for the post-pandemic world. While in the last 18 months, many things were uncertain and we were very vulnerable, I think anatomy in some ways came out stronger because we challenged our biases of how anatomy should be taught and realized that there is possibly more flexible ways in which we can teach anatomy. So I think we've learned a lot, and those insights are really important in terms of thinking about how we use this as an opportunity to reimagine our discipline. So anatomy is obviously going to go into the future. I think it is really important for the future. The one thing we've learned from our students is that they really miss having anatomy classes in the labs. So of course that is going to stay, but it actually is more than that. We have a role to play in how we educate our students. So what does it mean to actually really train them in the anatomical sciences? It's really about helping them to become better people, helping them to be more aware and richly responsible, not just in their professional lives, but in the communities that they serve. And so I think we are at that point, we are at this opportune point where there is an opportunity to actually transform our discipline so that we could be integral to developing future leaders for a really connected world. And I think in the IFAA and also in the various societies that are connected to the IFAA, there is an opportunity here for us to collaborate and work more closely together so that we can bridge the global gaps that exist across the world. I know some of those things that I've said you may not agree with, but I think it is an opportunity for us to start talking and hearing and learning from each other. And with that overview, I hope that I've presented to you an argument for why it matters that anatomy is inclusive, diverse, and accessible, and that you have more of an idea of just how broadly we want to cast the theme of this festival. So thank you for your attention.